I was massaging him. This was in Bhaktivedanta Manor. And for some reason we would always have a bottle of mustard oil and it was always one of those little aluminum tins of sandalwood oil, which he would use sandalwood oil on his head for massage, unless he was ill. Then there was no cold oil applied to his head. And then mustard oil on the rest of his body. And he would sometimes, during massage, he would put the lid back on the oil, on the mustard oil. So this particular day, I was sitting behind him, and I was rubbing his head with sandalwood oil. And after finishing his head, then I was doing that. We were alone in the room. I was massaging his back, and massaged his back with the mustard oil, of course, which was now in the bottle, which I didn't put the lid back on because it was not a problem. Anyway, I got up from his back and proceeded to move around to his side, and I knocked the bottle of mustard oil over on the floor. So immediately he turns around and sees, and he said, "Why didn't you have the lid on the mustard oil?" He said, "You're so foolish." He said, "You will be intelligent when you're 80, he said to me. And he said, "Get a cup." So I ran into the next room and I got a cup. And Prabhupada, both Prabhupada and I, now this was a little bottle of mustard oil, and we got the mustard oil, we would putting it on our hands and scraping it into the cup. Scraping, until we got basically all the oil up on the floor. He said, "Now use that oil," he said, "on my body." Because Prabhupada, this was another quality, never ever waste, never ever waste anything. Whatever you use, whatever you take, you use it. Whatever prasadam you take, you finish it. That was always. So he had me do that. So then I was there and I was massaging his arm, and this was my, I did have some sense of humor with Prabhupada, and we would, I would joke with him on occasion, but this one, it was just an opportunity, and whatever I said to Srila Prabhupada, I would think about once, think about it twice, 3, 4 times before I would say something. So a few minutes went by and I'm massaging Prabhupada, and he's very quiet. He just got done yelling, and he's very quiet with me, and I'm very quiet, and I'm thinking. So finally, I massaging his arm and rubbing, and I said, "Srila Prabhupada," I said, "thank you so much." I said, "I thought it would take a lot longer than that." And he cracked up laughing, and it just everything, it was so funny. He found it very amusing, I said, "I thought it would take so many more." I said, "I thought it would take so much longer," I said, "to become intelligent." So he was real pleased with that, that was funny.
This quality of compassion is the thing that distinguished Srila Prabhupada from everyone else. He was totally compassionate. I think the quote is "Paradukha Dukhi," the person who is so compassionate. That's the quality of the greatest devotee. No one is insignificant, and no one was insignificant to Srila Prabhupada. One devotee once said about his father, he said, "Oh, this is my father," and he said, "But he's not a devotee, but he's all right." And Prabhupada said, "No, a good fruit doesn't come from a bad seed." So in this way, the man felt so good about his son being a disciple of Srila Prabhupada because he was complimenting him in such a nice way. He didn't think anybody was insignificant. In that temple that we had in La Cienega Boulevard, some of these old ladies would come from the neighborhood, and they would come, and they were so old, they would have those old lady kind of shoes, that laced up, and Srila Prabhupada said, "They don't have to take their shoes off." And then Prabhupada said, "Put some chairs up in the back of the temple." And he let them sit up in the back of the temple with these chairs, and they would listen to Srila Prabhupada speak, and the devotees would have kirtan. And Srila Prabhupada he started the practice of circumambulating the temple from the inside, a big long circle, of all devotees. So he would come back to the back of the temple, and he raised his hands up in front of those old ladies and said, "Hare Krishna!" And the old ladies jumped up out of their chairs with their canes, and their little old lady shoes and little spectacles, and they said, "Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna." And they would sit back down again. Prabhupada would go around and lift his hands up, "Hare Krishna." And they would sit up again, perk up, and chant Hare Krishna. And he would make sure that they would get their prasadam and everything at that time. So Prabhupada's compassion was there for everybody. He was not saying anybody is insignificant. You know, everybody was a child of God in Prabhupada's eyes, and everybody had the, had the right to go back to home, back to Godhead, no matter what situation they were in. And some people were closer to getting there, and some people were not so close. But comparatively speaking, we're all thousands and millions of miles away.
Prabhupada, he would be told on so many occasions, devotees would come up and say, this devotee is doing something, or this devotee is not chanting his rounds, he is temple president. And never would you hear Prabhupada say then he should be removed. He would say, well, perhaps he is so busy, he does not have time to chant his rounds. It was so interesting because Prabhupada would lecture on the Vyasa-san, and in his writings, in his books, there was always very strict. There was, one must follow the 4 regulative principles, one must chant their 16 rounds, and that was it, and one must be fully engaged in Krishna service. But as soon as he would be in his quarters and there was some difficulty, then there was nothing but compassion. You've done so much service, see how you can take care of this. You just try, he would say, chant your rounds, and we will see what we can do. There was always an arrangement to be made. He would never reject someone because of a fall down, breaking one of the regulative principles. There was always something we can try to work it out. Of course, if someone said something about the philosophy, then there was instant, that was very bad. Immediately he was gone. But for a fall down, this was, for Prabhupada, this was to be expected, he would say. Once also here in Los Angeles, he said, if it was not, he said, for the chanting of the Maha Mantra, he said, you boys and girls could not do anything. He'd say, in the West, he said, you have so much drug use. He said, you could not accomplish anything, he said, except for the chanting of Hare Krishna. He said, it has enabled you to get all these temples, to get all these devotees. He said, it's simply by Krishna's mercy and the chanting.